So before I get started, let me provide a little context into the talk. What you heard earlier from Bjorn was a lot about the near-term achievements or the recent achievements of what we've done up to Polkadot 1.0. Gav just laid out a vision of the future of some of the things that are going to occur a little bit more long-term. We're going to talk about Blockspace, which is a step in that direction. But before I get started, I want to do a super quick survey, and I can't see, and I'm not going to do an Emily style. So how many of you have actually heard of Blockspace? And if you saw it on the Moonbeat slide this morning, that doesn't count. Okay. How many of you who raised your hands actually know what Blockspace is? That was Emily. Cool. All right, so we'll get started. So again, with that context, one of the things I wanted to say is some of the original theses that Polkadot put forward have actually come to pass. And in many ways, Polkadot originally laid out a roadmap for Blockspace and ecosystem concepts. And it's a fairly new concept in the blockchain world. So, Rob, you've been spending a lot of time adding depth and refining the concept of moving from a blockchain to a Blockspace mindset. So to kick us off, can you quickly define what that means around Blockspace and ecosystems and how we actually got to this point?
Yeah, it's, well, first of all, hi, everyone. Good to be here, and thanks for sticking around after the many previous talks before. So Blockspace is a big part of this transformation, this perspective shift of where we are now with Polkadot 1.0 versus where we're going. It's basically the formulation of what is the product that these systems are actually creating, right? Like we have validators, they're being paid through staking to do work. What is the thing that they're creating, and what is the fundamental unit of their work? And that's where Blockspace comes in. Is my mic coming out, or am I hearing
It's coming
things?
in and out.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what Blockspace is, and you can kind of think about it as units of decentralized security, or like droplets of decentralized security. Like we have these various raw resources like compute and networking, and value at stake and storage. That are all being spread across globally, fed into a consensus algorithm, and they're outputting these units of block space. And this is what we want to use to run applications. And as mentioned, we are shifting from thinking about running blockchains to utilizing block space. And you may have noticed the term core time in the previous talk. Core time is basically Polkadot's instantiation of allocating this raw resource. We have execution cores, Polkadot cores, and we split up and allocate chains or applications or programs, tasks onto these cores to fulfill that block space allocation.
Cool. So going back to one of Gav's points, the idea of a smart contract running on a core, super cool, but the distance from where we are today to there, we have some ground to cover. You've been spending time evangelizing the idea of hybrid chains, where you're suggesting that every blockchain should run a smart contract. And that's in part because of the asynchronous and the benefits of asynchronous and synchronous processing on a single blockchain, but it also gets you to optimize the utilization of block space. So can you talk a little bit more about that so you can share the concept with the audience and the benefits of hybrid chains?
Yeah, so hybrid chains are this concept, and I wrote a blog post about this with a little bit of a troll title of every chain should have smart contracts, just to get some clickbait up and make people think about it. But essentially, I think that this model of fully application-specific machines, like 100% does one specific thing, is probably not how the decentralized economy is going to shake out overall. Simply for the fact that communication between different programs or applications that are running in Polkadot or in any system where they have to be connected by something like channels or other bridges or whatever it may be, that has overheads, it has time. when you tightly bundle things, you kind of combine specialization and generalization, you can have instantaneous communication between the parts. So a lot of how this, the structure of this economy is going to shake out is based on, to what degree we tightly and loosely couple things, taking into account the real costs of communication. So this is where that hybrid chains idea comes into. You've got a blockchain which has some specific application logic, and that gets anchored to some generalized component like smart contracts, so that if you're building some new utility, your users can build directly alongside you and instantaneously interact with that. So this is a concept about optimizing block space consumption. We can talk about the production side all day, but this would be the consumption side to make sure that the economy is as efficient as possible.
Okay, so to move into a little bit more of examples, both Blockspace and hybrid change are kind of new ideas. People are moving in that direction. I do want to talk about examples. Like I was just chatting with the team at Oak Network. They said, of course, after having chats with you, they want to move in the direction of a hybrid chain. But they also talked about in the context of Blockspace that really the quality of the Blockspace was one of the deciding factors for them to build on Polkadot. And you have a lot of opportunity to talk with all the teams in the ecosystem. I was wondering if you could share just a few examples of those who are headed in the direction of really focusing on Blockspace or hybrid change or both.
Well, I'm aware of a few that have adopted the hybrid chain approach, and I'm certainly not going to be able to list off all of them, but a few that come to mind are Zeitgeist and Interlay, and I know there are others. They're not coming to mind right now, but I think the idea has been quite receptive because it allows teams to build up their developer community directly alongside what they're doing. And the truth is that in Substrate, turning your chain into a hybrid chain is actually very easy. It takes a couple lines of changes in code, and off you go.
So did they discuss the benefits mostly about the development side, about how to change, or did they think about it in the context of what they're delivering to their markets, like DeFi, or how is that going to help them achieve their goals?
Yeah, it's I think primarily for these teams, it's about establishing a builder community around the project that they're building that can innovate directly alongside what they're doing. That they can build out primitives and have extensions. People pick up and write extensions that go directly alongside that. Because if you talk about a new application or a new primitive, this application can target many different verticals. And the question is, do you want those verticals to live inside of the bubble of where your chain is living or your project is living, or do you want it to live outside of that bubble? And if it's outside, I think eventually many of these things will go outside, just there are higher costs. So you could think about these as innovation engines for the chains. From the conversations that I had, it sounds like those teams and those applications are looking for almost incubation of new use cases directly alongside their application logic that they can spin out into their own state machines that run on cores with the rest.
That's great. So let's come back to some of the core ideas on Blockspace. So we've chit-chatted about allocation models, but let's come back to that. Can you dig a little deeper today on the different types of Blockspace allocation models in Polkadot and the benefits? They're around particularly efficiency and availability. There was again some discussion. Some of the teams may know on-demand parachains or what was parathreads. And how does that get us into a direction of what Gav was talking about with how cores will get allocated, and ultimately that's designed for allocating block space as it's needed. So if you could dive into that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. The current model in Polkadot is the slots model. So you have auctions for periods of basically guaranteed high frequency block space for 6 months to 2 years. And when I say high frequency, it means that this chunk of block space, future block space, or core time is allocated onto the chain and gets to make a block every 6 seconds. So we're changing the model there, introducing on-demand models. On-demand models would be essentially paying the market price. There's a market price for making one block. Okay, you pay the market price to the relay chain, and you get the right to make one block, one state transition. So you can have infrequent stuff. And so this covers both extremes of the spectrum. One extreme is the pure on-demand, pure intermittent level, and then the other extreme is the long-term high frequency, right? So we can think of like a block-space demand distribution. And what we're generally trying to do is generalize the offerings at the core level of Polkadot so that we can hit larger segments of this block space demand distribution that reach different audiences. So for example, if you are looking at this tinkerer bootstrapping audience, this is where on-demand really comes in. You can just write code, deploy it, and go. But if your application is scaling, then you might need reserved block space. How high frequency is it? That's a question for the moment. So building out proper markets is definitely the direction that we're going.
So I'll come back to the Tinker question in just a little bit, but we've also chatted about a mixed model of allocations. In your mind, what are some of the situations where that might apply? Once that capability becomes together, of course, we have slot-based. We'll introduce on-demand. One day, we'll be able to bring both of those models together to suit, kind of fit-for-purpose needs. So what are some of the ideas and use cases around that kind of model?
The main use case is boosting throughput. So, there are a couple mixed models, but I think the main one is boosting, right? Like if you look at the usage patterns of applications in general across the entire internet, it's quite common that they have like some low level of sustained usage and then experience intermittent bursts. And this is what like the whole cloud business model is based across, right? You have reserved instances and you have spot instances. And your application has a few reserved instances. You have predictable load for what you're going to be executing for a long period of time. And then all of a sudden, your website hits the front page of Reddit, and you're getting 1 million users every minute. You have to handle that so you can scale up with Spot. That's the underlying principle behind mixing these things, right? Like you shouldn't be paying for block space you don't need and aren't using, but should always have the ability to scale up and boost. And I think this is something that should be quite attractive for developers, because when you're bootstrapping an ecosystem, when you're bootstrapping a developer network, this mixing of different allocation models is going to allow proper scaling at good costs.
So I'm pretty certain you're going to have an opinion on the next part of this question, but there are other blockchain implementations that are a little bit more rigid in the way that they're focusing on processing and allocating block space. What's kind of the difference? Because the way I see it, this is a way to efficiently avoid things like network congestion. There's also going to be a cost element to this, but wanted to get your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, so comparing and contrasting to what's going on in the overall blockchain or crypto ecosystem is most ecosystems are focused on something that's like pure spot. So just pay as you go on demand, in Ethereum or Bitcoin, you just pay a fee and you post a transaction. And they're building out all of their scaling technology on top of this one scheduling primitive. And that's kind of a problem because, one, you don't have any kind of guarantees about where the prices for that market are going to be in the future. It's highly volatile, and it's inefficient to have to do so much scheduling overhead. Like, they bounce that inefficiency in these systems onto the nodes to try to figure out, which transactions are going to pay the most and what are the routes that are going to be most profitable, and just kind of hope that people are going to search for these profitable routes. But you're going to get it's a lot of churn, right? And I think it's important when growing to have a good balance between churn and stability so that things are predictable. I've been saying that you need three things. You need scalability, you need security, and you need good scheduling. It doesn't matter how much you scale if you're allocating all of those scaling resources to projects that aren't making good use of them. So allocative efficiency is one of the most important things. And where we're coming from is going to, yes, we want to go to that on-demand model which may have high churn and less predictable prices or less predictable intervals between transactions. But we also want to go into the bulk direction. And then it's just a matter for governance to figure out what is the appropriate level of bulk block space and how can we further subdivide that. But to go into the bulk direction and the high churn direction to give projects stability and predictability and lower costs for them. So
I think one of the things that's really great in Gav had the good fortune of being involved in another project, and he wanted, as he mentioned earlier on the stage, he wanted to solve some problems. Like when you get into a situation, you see what some of the challenges are, and you need to evolve, and that's great. One of the things that's really great about the Polkadot platform is its flexibility. And so there are not many platforms who would even be able to offer this. And I wanted to switch a little bit, but still focusing on Blockspace. And you talked about tinkerers. I want to hit on two kind of concepts. One is just the general idea of flexibility and how it applies. But if you think about the tinkerer and how that gets to kind of a product lifecycle, so someone in your terms you say experimenting, then there's journey to product market fit, and then there's scaling. How does the allocation model help out with that? You touched on it a little bit, but if you can also talk about the flexibility of what Polkadot provides in terms of the block space it can offer, how does it help that journey and help innovators go along the way?
Yeah, this is like a really important point. Now, if we're speaking about where we are today, the models actually aren't particularly good for that audience, as has been addressed. But to speak about the vision of where we are going and would like to go, let's take a journey through the steps of a tinkerer who's deploying a product. There are different kinds of people who want to get their feet into building products or applications or software protocols, whatever it may be. You have some people who really like bootstrapping stuff, right? They don't want to raise money from anybody. They just want to get something out there as a lone wolf for a few people and build it and make it profitable and sustainable and scale out from there. And then you also have people who do want to raise money and come up with an idea and get resources. And you can cater to both of those different kinds of audience. But broadly, we can term this as the bootstrapper audience of teams that don't have very high capitalization and don't have a ton of resources at their disposal and don't have a very mature product yet. So the way that I imagine this would work is that you'd have teams initially deploy some version of their software, and they can upload their code to the Polkadot network and start immediately building on-demand parachain blocks. You could imagine, for example, doing this on the basis of when there are enough transactions for this protocol to cover the cost of an on-demand block, a collator will be incentivized to make one, right? They'll get the fees, and they'll also pay for the block, and it's an even exchange. So you could bootstrap that way, or you could also, start throwing some resources at it to try to have a more intermittent, because you have to build an audience, right? There are things like that you may need to do. Then from there, you might reach a point of scale where you need consistent block space, and you can go either to say something like the proposed brokerage parachain to get some low frequency guaranteed block space, like making a block once every minute for the next 4 weeks, or making a block every 30 seconds, or possibly to even go to a full secondary market, like buy this from another parachain in a way where they feel that they don't need the block space based on their anticipated demand, so they can just sell this off. And your chain can buy it. And this is what the scaling journey should look like. As the application is growing, it'll reserve more and more block space for itself on the open market.
That's great. And it's really great to hear how Polkadot is helping remove barriers to innovation. It's super important. So a couple more topics. I've kind of described the shared security model and composability as kind of the connective tissue in a block space ecosystem. One of the things that was really unique about what Polkadot actually set forth in that model. Now there are some other projects that are trying to copy, but there's an economic aspect to this which is going to be different. It's one thing to say that you're going after a particular idea. It's another way to say that you can implement it in a way that is similar with the same levels of security. But there's another aspect to it, which is cost. You had mentioned there's another project out there that did something interesting while trying to follow the good lead of Polkadot around shared security, but there is an economic implication which can force a trade-off. Sometimes now, you talked about the tinkerers, they don't want to raise a lot of money. There may be a cost now to acquiring shared security capabilities on another project. So I wondered if you wanted to expand on that a bit as well.
Yeah, well, the main thing is you have to pay validators somehow. They're doing work, and they're putting stake on the line, so they take a risk, they need a reward. So for systems to be sustainable, some value has to be recouped. And you can frame this as rent. That's not necessarily the same thing as being rent seeking. But the trend that we've seen is that actually this delivers a much lower cost to the users than having to pay validators directly when they can, say, restake and share their stake across securing many, many different applications at once. I'm not sure exactly what's being or what you're alluding to with like this specific example. I have a couple of ideas in mind. Like I think it's maybe notable that interchain security has been taking like token percentages from teams that are building like on the hub, the Cosmos hub. It's a different model. I think that it's probably better not to take a proportion of an application's ownership in perpetuity as a means of buying security from like a shared security set. There are also like other technical challenges. Overall, I think it's much better to have specific costs that are not anchored to giving up ownership in exchange for shared security.
Yeah, and that was the specific example, and I don't know about you, but the idea of paying for shared security seems really, really odd. But let me move on. So one more topic kind of core to Blockspace is the idea of flexibility. We've chatted about like narrow use cases, rigid kind of block space is okay, but in the world of Web3 where you truly want to scale and you want to participate in an ecosystem to deliver value, what are the different dimensions of flexibility and how do they apply not just to an individual blockchain or use case, but a broader ecosystem?
If we're talking about like the flexibility of block space, what that broadly means is that you can do a lot of different things with it. Like certain systems, I think in particular, if you look at zero knowledge systems, they're very constrained in terms of what you can do as a programmer, like to write code. Or you can look at many smart contract systems, right, where you're constrained to a very particular coding language, or even like high constraints on the costs of even small operations, to the point that it's not very flexible in writing applications of varying complexity. So this is where we get to with flexibility. Like you should be able to write code that feels like normal code, that doesn't have an uncomfortable amount of constraints riding on it, that's in a typical programming language, which people are accustomed to. And I think that opens the door to a lot more applications being built simply on that virtue. Now, these other systems are very capable, and I think you can make them do a lot of different things. But with respect to flexibility, it's very important to be able to customize like data storage and formats, and Polkadot really takes steps to keep all of this stuff opaque so that the application can generalize it.
Great. So we've covered a lot of aspects of Blockspace in a short amount of time, from quality to flexibility, availability, and then in the broader sense of the ecosystem, how shared security supports that, how composability makes it all work together. So I'm going to ask one more big question, and it might wade into a little bit of the territory of what Gav was presenting. But we have this place of, as you mentioned, where we are today. So what really does the future hold for Blockspace and Polkadot?
Well, it's hard to say, right? But as a little bit of a brain dump, I think that this notion of elastic scaling, like when we move beyond this one core per chain paradigm, a lot of opportunities open up. And in particular, you have, okay, let's look at more than one core per chain, right? So you have what we term elastic scaling. How do we build a system where an application can take as many of Polkadot's cores as it's able to acquire for a period of time and fill those all with transactions, right? Like scale to 10, 20, or even maybe in the future 100 times where it is for a short period of time to accommodate load. That's like one extreme. The other end of the spectrum is, what if you have far less than one core for a chain for a period of time? So those have already been broadly discussed, especially within Gav's talk. Then you can also consider changing how we think about blockchains, right? Like, or applications. Is an application or something that lives on a core something that needs to run forever? Because the mental model around blockchains is you start a blockchain, it makes blocks at a regular interval, and then it just goes on and on and on forever, right? We could also think about using these cores and using Polkadot's Blockspace to create shorter-lived processes, right? You have an application that needs to offload a bit of work, and it's a completely self-contained piece of work. So it offloads that, and then it utilizes cores and utilizes Blockspace until it's done, and then it just concludes. It sort of sends a message saying, hey, I finished the work, here was the result, back to the original application, and then concludes. So I think we can approach this with much more of a CPU-like model, and start changing the ways that we think about applications as they exist in the blockchain world.
Yeah, that's great. And there's one more topic in futures that I know you've brought up and you've been thinking about, which are Blockspace marketplaces. I know we're a bit of ways from there, but it's really fascinating to think as we talk about allocation and utilization that there might be a secondary market and a whole economic model around the efficient utilization of Blockspace within an ecosystem. So I wonder if you could share a couple of thoughts about that as well.
Yeah. So in Gav's presentation, I know you're all here, but this is more maybe for the recording. He discussed having NFTs, right, that corresponded to scheduling instances. And one way that we might implement this under the hood is with a design called like Blockspace regions, or that's what we've been calling it, but could be renamed. And this is essentially, it's a description of ownership of future rights to Blockspace. So it's got like a start, when the region starts, when the region ends, and how frequent the blocks, how frequently it allows the owner to get access to a core. But specifically, these types of regions could be split. They could split based on time, right? You turn a 6-month region into 2 3-month regions, or a 2-month region and a 4-month region. Or you take something that's at a frequency of access to core on every relay chain block to an access to a core on every second or every third, and you can decompose it that way as well. Now, once we have the ability to do that, we can imagine secondary markets that people in the Polkadot ecosystem create, which can do order matching, right? You have somebody who says, hey, I need this much block space, roughly this much block space, and somebody else says, oh, I don't need this much block space, I'd like to sell it, and some system that can do order matching between them and say like, okay, well, I'm going to take all of these different offers on the marketplace and all of these different requests and sort of split these up and recombine them in a way that meets what those buyers are looking for. So I think that the long-term where we're going is to see bulk block space entering the system, and then secondary markets making sure that this gets allocated in the exact quantities that applications need at any particular moment.
So I just want to say thanks, Rob. It's been a really great discussion in talking about this general idea of moving from thinking about blockchains to Blockspace, connecting all the dots here with some of our conversations. Thank you for your time, sharing your insight. For the audience, I'll echo what Rob said at the beginning. Thanks for hanging out with us. We know hopefully you've been getting a lot out of this. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you being part of Polkadot. You'll hear a lot more about Blockspace from Polkadot as well as the ecosystem. We've actually just started publishing a lot more information on this. You can go check it out on our website. But thank you again, and with that, we'll let you go.